even when he's attacked. In fact, when he's attacked, he just gets more vicious in his charge. Vicious in the kind of way that we as conservative Republicans like to see. He has the gentle touch necessary in order to communicate his message, but he will never be gentle when it comes time to standing up for true principles. Principles that we as Americans stand behind. Principles that have caused this nation, the United States of America, to become the greatest civilization the world has ever known. It's people like Carl Wimmer who understand that this system, the one that has brought us so much peace and prosperity in this country over the last 224 years, that same system is under attack right now. It's being weakened as a result of a few people in Washington, D.C. who think that they can govern better than Americans can govern themselves at the state and the local level, who want to consolidate virtually all power at one level within the federal government. It was interesting, earlier this week we had a hearing in the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee where I serve, and we had two special guests at our hearing that I was able to interview. One was Justice Antonin Scalia, one of my personal favorites, and the other was Justice Stephen Breyer. Justice Scalia opened his remarks before the committee by explaining that when we talk about the Constitution, sometimes we overlook its most important fundamental tenet. We overlook what may be its most distinguishing feature as you compare it to other constitutions the world over. What he said was that you'll find that every tin-horn dictator in the world can pull out a Bill of Rights. Every banana republic can point to a constitution that may speak in lofty terms about rights. But whether or not those rights are actually respected has something to do with elements of the Constitution that stand separate and apart from the Bill of Rights. As he pointed out, one of the most glorious looking documents in terms of a Bill of Rights is what was found in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution of the former USSR, the Soviet Union. It contained not only the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion, freedom of press, but it made clear that if any government official ever harassed someone for speaking their mind or speaking out against the government, that they themselves would be in prison. It was a scintillating document. But he said it failed because, among other things, it allowed for the one deadly sin that occurs among central national governments. It allowed for excessive consolidation of political power. It didn't split the power up among three separate equal branches of government, nor did it split up power between national power and state and local power. As a result of that, people's rights were thwarted. There was no independent judiciary to step in. There were no independent state and local governments that were powerful enough to stand up to the national government and say, cut this out. This is where Carl Wimmer stands as an exceptional, unusually well-qualified candidate for the U.S. Congress, because he's been fighting this fight already. He's been fighting it for years. I first got to know Carl Wimmer shortly after he started serving in the Utah legislature. The first time I met him in person, I said to him, jokingly of course, Carl, the problem I have with you is that you never run any kind of legislation that's at all controversial. You only run the easy stuff. He, of course, could tell immediately that I was joking, because this is a man that doesn't shy away from a fight. He especially is a man who doesn't shy away from a fight that involves protecting our most fundamental individual liberties and our most important divisions of power between state and federal. I've never been more pleased to be involved in a legislative discussion than I was to be involved with Carl Wimmer a few years ago, when he was pushing that great piece of legislation, House Bill 167, in which he convinced the Utah legislature and the governor to sign on to a bill that said, in anticipation of Obamacare passing, in the event that a national health reform initiative is passed by Congress, the state of Utah will not participate in implementing it until such time as the Utah State Legislature has had a chance to review that legislation and affirmatively act to uphold it. Carl, that helped us move along. as my good friend Mark Shurtleff, our esteemed Attorney General. Let's give him a big hand, by the way. My good friend Attorney General Mark Shurtleff, a stalwart of conservatism and a defender of the Constitution, will tell you that it was that legislation that helped us maintain constitutional standing in the litigation in which those states that banded together, including our own state, led by our Attorney General Shurtleff, proved victorious at the end of the day in litigating that in federal court in Florida, and we had a victory on appeal in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, and it looks like that case is now headed to the U.S. Supreme Court. It is entirely possible, if not likely, that that entire litigation would have foundered for lack of standing, but for the bill introduced and passed under the leadership of Representative Carl Wimmer. So what that shows, among other things, is that Carl's willing not only to be a leader, not only to do things that are difficult, but he also understands this connection between political and legal, that the Constitution is something that's to be addressed not only within the courts, but also within the political branches. What happens within the political branches affects what gets to the courts. He gets this. That's why we need him back there so badly. Here's the interesting thing about all of this. In recent years, what we found is that there is a division of belief and of passion in this country. There is a division of thought as to what the proper course of action is for our federal government. You have one side that says we need a federal government that is as big as it is now or needs to get bigger. You have another side that says no, we've gone dangerously off course. We've overlooked the fact that the federal government was always supposed to have powers that James Madison described in Federalist Number 45 as few and defined, while those reserved to the states were always intended to be numerous and indefinite. We've switched those, and a growing number of Americans are coming simultaneously to the realization that the federal government is too big and too expensive. Because all of a sudden it's the federal government whose powers are numerous and indefinite, and those of the states have become few and defined. The battle lines have been drawn. The American people are having this debate to a much more significant, robust degree than has occurred in the last century at least. 2012 is going to be a pivotal time in our history because it's in 2012 when these decisions will be fully right and placed before the American people. We'll have a choice between President Barack Obama and someone else. I intend to vote for someone else. We'll also have a choice in 435 congressional elections nationwide, 4 of which will take place right here in this state. We'll have a choice when it comes to Utah's yet to be fully defined 4th congressional district. Each time we have the opportunity to make that choice, we as people who love America, who believe in American exceptionalism, who believe that the Constitution was written by the hands of wise and inspired men, raised up by their Maker under that very purpose. We need to stand with the truth. If we will do that, we will see that what happens in 2012 will make what happened in 2010 look like a Sunday picnic. Remember the bull. He's the bull. Help the bull get to Congress. We need him. In closing, let me just say, I'm really glad you held this event at this particular venue today. Noah's is a place of great significance for me personally. I held many of my early campaign events here. I held my primary election night victory party right here. right over there, just outside that door, that I got a phone call from my primary election opponent conceding the race to me, and just a few moments later I was able to give my victory speech right here. It was on what I call Super Tuesday, Caucus Day of 2010, that I had a large gathering very similar to this one right here in this room. It's altogether fitting that we should have another beginning. The kickoff for the Carl Wimmer for Congress campaign right here. This is where this race starts. This is where we get this bull out of the gates and off to where he can get to the finish line. We can do this if we work together. We can, and we must, and we will. May God continue to bless the sovereign state of Utah, and may God bless America. Thank you very much.